Hello everyone, my name is Arilia Mount.
And my name is Romina Tantaleán. We're both UBC PhD social justice students from Peru, living as uninvited immigrants and settlers in the so-called Vancouver, in the ancestral territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. In both Peru and Canada, we live in the context of low-intensity struggles, as our lives are not in danger or at risk.
The indigenous peoples of the Brazilian Amazon face unprecedented challenges to survive within a contemporary violent development model. This has led to widespread and uncontrolled logging, violent invasions, resulting in dispossession of indigenous communities, illegal gold mining and oil plantation, commercial agro-industry, and large-scale extractivist projects. Despite all these challenges, indigenous peoples, who are the forest's last line of defense, are currently facing a new coordinated attack on their ancestral territories and human rights, and on the fight to save the Amazon, which is home to the so-called lungs of the planet, the single largest remaining tropical rainforest in the world and houses at least 10% of the known biodiversity.
This new threat involves two fronts. One is a series of bills proposed in the Brazilian Congress that represent enormous risks to the environment, accelerating the destruction of the Amazon and constituting a systematic attack on indigenous peoples. And the other front involves a landmark Supreme Court case over the so-called Marco Temporal that could have a major impact on the survival of indigenous peoples and on the protection of the Amazon. If the legislation passes and the ruling to go against indigenous people's rights, the consequences will be catastrophic. The Bolsonaro government plans to open the Amazon and other protected areas to predatory mining, logging, farming, and cattle ranchers.
Here, we will refer to just three specific bills that threaten to cancel indigenous rights to force contact with indigenous peoples in the voluntary isolation and to accelerate the Amazon destruction.
The first of the bills, Bills 2633, known as the Land Grabbing Bill, was approved by the lower house of the Brazilian Congress in August of 2021. In practice, this bill encourages and gives amnesty to land grabbers who invade indigenous territories, thus legalizing illegal occupied lands. Another worrying bill is Bill 490, which changes the rules for demarcating indigenous territories, thereby threatening to cancel legal protections for the lands. If lawmakers pass this bill, it will end indigenous people's rights to consult on the use of their lands.
The state of Acre is currently facing its own version of stampede. As Mongolian News reports, a few other bills propose a reduction of the important Chico Mendes extractive reserve, and also it reduces the protected status of Serra do Divisor National Park, which is located on the border of Peru. Bill 6024 would allow the construction of a highway from Crucero do Sul in Acre to Pucallpa in Peru. This highway threatens the lives of indigenous people in voluntary isolation with devastating impacts on the Peruvian Amazon too.
Landmark Federal Supreme Court. Meanwhile, the Brazilian Supreme Court is about to rule on a pivotal case for indigenous land rights, the landmark case Marco Temporal, that could either affirm indigenous land rights or set a precedent by stripping territorial rights that were not officially recognized when the Brazilian Constitution was approved in 1988. While the landmark case Marco Temporal was scheduled to be ruled on last August 25th, the Brazilian Supreme Court postponed the trial for the fifth time.
According to the Association of Indigenous Peoples of Brazil, APIC, on Mongolian News, about 6,000 indigenous leaders have gathered in Brazil's capital, Brasilia, since August 22nd, in a massive demonstration called Struggle for Life. Thousands of indigenous leaders from 176 indigenous groups marched to pressure the Supreme Court to respect and ensure indigenous land rights. This is the largest mobilization of indigenous leaders in more than 3 decades. Thousands of indigenous people remain in Brasilia, vigilant of the Supreme Court ruling.
Socio-political and economic layers. In the past few weeks, Bolsonaro publicly encouraged farmers to use violence against indigenous peoples. Land grabbers are standing by, armed and afraid, and ready to invade at the border of some of the settlements. As Professor Vanessa Andreotti notes, we are either heading towards witnessing a wave of genocide, or we are already there, and it's just not been documented.
Analysis of the 4 denials in the case of the Amazon rainforest multiple crises. Here, we will describe how each denial operates in the case of Brazil. The first one is the denial of historical and ongoing violence, and the denial of our complicity in harm. The fact that our comforts, securities, and enjoyments in low-intensity struggles and contexts are fundamentally subsidized and maintained by violence committed somewhere else. This means that the costs of our current global modern colonial system are externalized to other populations. So, those who enjoy the comforts of modernity are not generally aware that these comforts happen at the expenses of other populations.
In the case of Brazil, the systemic and ongoing violence perpetrated to open the Amazon and other protected areas to predatory mining, logging, and farming aim mainly to sustain and supply the overconsumption of meat and soy in low-intensity struggles. The violence is manifested through open fires in Amazon areas, invasions in indigenous territories by armed subjects, the assassination of indigenous leaders, along with legal violence. This situation is leading to the genocide of indigenous peoples and the ecocide of the Amazon forest.
Second, the denial of the limits of the planet and the unsustainability of modernity coloniality. The fact that definitive Earth metabolism cannot sustain exponential growth indefinitely. The case of Brazil demonstrates the ways in which our current modern and colonial dominant system operates by reducing the Amazon rainforest to a resource to be extracted, commodified, and exploited.
Third, the denial of entanglement, our insistence on seeing ourselves as separate from each other and the land, rather than entangled within a living wider metabolism. In Brazil, the combined social, political, economic, and territorial factors demonstrate the denial of entanglement and how separability has become institutionalized through legal violence in the coordinated legal and judicial attack. Brazilian state-led separability manifests in the violence inflicted on the Amazon and on the living wider metabolism of the planet.
And lastly, the denial of the magnitude and the complexity of the problems we need to face together. In the case of Brazil, this denial reproduces the illusion that we can continue living as we are with overconsumption and unsustainable growth at the expense of indigenous peoples and the Amazon itself. This illusion also erases the possibility of plural and healthier ways of being, doing, and coexisting, and in doing so, it denies our collective entanglement and different implications in times of social and ecological global crisis.
Why does this case matter? Why is it urgent? Why do we need to walk the tightrope?
The last warning educational campaign co-led by the Federation of the Unique Indigenous People of Acre in the Brazilian Amazon exposes how these coordinated attacks are not only an attack on the peoples of Brazil, but on humanity's future. If we lose the Amazon, we lose our future and the possibilities to remember it together. The consequences would, of course, be global. More deforestation will turn the Amazon from a rainforest into a savanna or grassland.
The Hunikuy people believe that our planetary responsibilities require us to interrupt our collective indifference. For this, we need to bear witness to the consequences of unsustainable ideas of progress and prosperity based on hyper-individualism and overconsumption. As the Hunikuy people highlight, this might be humanity's last chance to step up and safeguard the indigenous people's lands in Brazil and elsewhere. Here we will see a message from Chief Ninawa of the Hunikuy.
Precisamos de uma campanha global que sensibilize o mundo para o perigo que está acontecendo no Brasil. Precisamos de sua ajuda para fazer isso acontecer. Se nós temos qualquer chance de lutar contra um desastre climático global, não podemos perder a Amazônia. Temos que colocar o direito indígena de todo o mundo como prioridade na pauta das mudanças climáticas. Isso afeta de fato a todos nós. Precisamos fazer a humanidade acordar para o fato que estamos destruindo o nosso próprio futuro. Estamos destruindo a nossa possibilidade de existir dentro desse planeta. O único jeito de garantir nosso futuro é caminhando junto, com solidariedade, com maturidade, com discernimento e responsabilidade. Precisamos de cada um de você nessa luta.
Towards new mistakes, because of the interconnectedness of our current global crisis, those of us working in social justice issues in the context of low-intensity struggles would need to face and sit with the fact that
we are complicit with the ongoing harm and violence in high-intensity struggles, like the violence inflicted on the Brazilian Amazon. This unsettling truth compels us to repair and exist differently, without reproducing the same harms and mistakes of our current global system, by learning to walk the tightrope with honesty, humility, and hyper-self-reflexivity. We invite you to bear witness to the violence of the Brazilian government, the struggles and sacrifices of indigenous peoples in Brazil, and the harm that is being caused to the Amazon forest. If you want to become a witness, see here the last warning campaign.
From the Andean ancestral lands of Peru, from the waters of Chauquin, the center of the center, we offer eucalyptus with the leaves of our mother plant, the coca. This offering is for the continuity of life. These quintus of eucalyptus are for the continuity of the Amazon rainforest and the indigenous communities are within it. Within Chauquin, we are in a natural triangle through which pass two rivers that originate in the Peruvian Cordillera Blanca. The Mosna River flows south to north, and the Rochester River flows west to east. Both rivers join and continue from Mosna. Later, the waters are part of the Marañón River. Then they get part of the Amazon River, reaching the ancestral Amazon lands of Brazil, until we become part of the Atlantic Ocean. We offer this quinto from the capital, the in-between world where we live in, with the company of our ancestors from the Wukupacha, the world below, and Hayambacha, the world above.